Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual meetup, a fireside chat with Kevin Anderson, who's a product manager working on experimentation at Vista. I'm your host, Sid, from the product marketing team at Statsig. And today's fireside chat will be a candid conversation about experimentation with someone who's really been in this space for a long, long time at the intersection of product management, analytics, and experimentation. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of great anecdotes and insights to be shared today. As people trickle in, I just want to get a couple of quick housekeeping items out of the way. The first is that we will be recording the session. So we will send this to you in a couple of days so that you can share it with your colleagues and evangelize this within your organizations as well. And the second is that we solicited some questions during registration. So I've kind of compiled the general themes that we saw into 6 or 7 questions for Kevin. But we'll also have some time set aside at the end of the chat for taking a few questions live. So you can use either the chat option or the Q&A on the Zoom panel to send in your questions. And I'll keep monitoring them throughout the webinar so I can post them to Kevin at the end. So with that said and done, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today. You've obviously been at the intersection, like I said, of experimentation, analytics, and product management for nearly 2 decades. And I'm sure many people in the audience know your newsletter, Experimental Mind. You also run Experimentation Jobs, which is a premium job board for roles related to experimentation. So I have to ask, one, what about this domain really attracted you to it in the first place and continues to excite you today? And can you also touch upon your current role at Vista?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sid, for the nice introduction and, of course, for the invitation. First of all, now I feel a bit old, right? 2 decades in this role or in this space. It's amazing, yeah, to be honest. Yeah, but I love it. I love this space. And I think when I look back, starting my career and well, maybe even going back further, going to university and learning about the scientific method and applying that to marketing or to product development, you think, well, every company is doing this, right? But then I entered the corporate world and I had some experience with companies and how they would develop products or do marketing. And then you think, well, this is much more based on gut feelings than on scientific evidence. But then I learned from many teams within the company that I worked for at the beginning, but also from the bigger industry, the bigger space, that many companies are doing scientific research in this area, right? And doing actual A/B tests with customers to learn from them and to better develop products. And if I go back, I think when I started as a web analyst, the first big project I was involved in was with a major redesign of the website. I worked for Postbank back in the days. And this project was mostly run with feelings or ideas about how we should approach it. And then only later in that project, someone said, okay, well, we definitely need to test it in production, right? And at that point, this was only 1 or 2 people in the bigger digital department who had experience with that. But I immediately saw the big impact and the big benefits of doing those kind of tests with customers. So not only making sure it works from a technical standpoint, but also that it works from a user perspective. And I think from that point, yeah, that's probably 2 decades ago now. From that point, I've been fascinated by this, and I want to spread this to other companies, to other departments, and I've been trying my best to do that. Yeah, and now 2.5 years ago, I've joined Vista or Vista Print as a product manager for experimentation, and my role is to just enable, or just it's not an easy task, I guess, but enable the company to do experimentation at scale. So that means finding out where the points of friction are. coming up with the team for solutions and implement them and getting the whole company and teams along that ride. So yeah, been loving that, and we're definitely not done.
Nice. I want to definitely go a bit deeper into that, eliminating friction in the experimentation process. But first, I'd like to ask you, just because you have so much visibility in this space, doing your newsletter and also like on one hand working with, your internal stakeholders at Vista, but also maybe vendors and looking at what's happening in the industry. I'm curious to know, like, what are the major changes or trends that you've seen maybe in the last couple of years in this space?
Yeah, sure. I think one big change is that although many companies within the marketing department would have been doing conversion rate optimizations maybe for many years, now you see all those companies also adopting it in the product space, right? So also the product development is becoming more and more experimentation driven. And I think one of the best examples is that like companies like Statsig, right, where they evolved from team members from Facebook or Meta, started their own company and bringing the best tools to the market. And I think the same is happening with Spotify, doing something with confidence. Same is happening maybe for Apple. I don't want to list all those companies, but yeah, you get the point. I think there are many internal, well-defined products developed within companies that are now being brought to the market. I think that is a big benefit because those companies bring the experience of how to do experimentation at scale to the broader market. So I think that's probably one reason and one trigger for the rise of experimentation the last couple of years as well. Because I think adoption is increasing. There are more and more people talking about it. We are still learning how to do it properly, right? There's still debate on how to do it the best way. But I think in this space, because it's so open and transparent, we're sharing what is working and how to do it, and to do it in the best way, that other people can also adopt that approach and get along the journey. So I think those kind of bigger trends are definitely helping in growing the experimentation part. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that it's still an evolving space where people are still figuring out like, what the ideal state looks like. So I'm curious to know from your point of view, what does a great experimentation culture look like? And maybe if you could also touch upon what were some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered in building that culture?
Yeah, I think first of all, building a culture is never done, right? It's something that is continually evolving. People join a company, people leave companies. So culture is something that needs to be nurtured all the time. And you can build a culture, but it can also almost collapse, right? So I think it's really important to just keep nurturing the values that you think are important. When I think about experimentation, I think curiosity, right, is really important, right? You need to have a bunch of people that are curious. They want to learn about customers. They want to learn about the best way to do doing stuff. So that it starts with curiosity. I think you also have to have the value of doing bold action, right? Doing stuff that is not only incremental stuff, but trying to take big swings, and trying to see where you can go, right? To be ambitious, but also, well, actually doing it. So that's bold action. But then again, you have to be humble, right? Yeah, you have to make sure that, or be aware of that. Probably your big idea is going to fail, or at least the first attempt is not going to be the big success you're hoping this will be. So this humbleness is also really important. And then if you are learning this, right, you're curious, you're asking the questions, you're learning, you're taking big swings. You want to share that across the company, right? So I think transparency is also very important when we talk about experimentation, because if you're only learning by yourself or within your team, then you're holding out of all those insights that other teams can also benefit from. And the other way around, other people can question the approach you're taking, right? So that's also why transparency is also so very important, to make it better every day.
Nice. So how any thoughts on how someone can do that? Like it's an ideal state to be in where, all the learnings are being shared across the organization, everyone is involved and like, part of that process. How do you go about, enabling that at Vista?
I think from the start, what we at least try to do is to do as much as possible things publicly, right, within the company. So from the default state is that we, for example, in Slack, channels are mostly public. Um, in Statsig, when we run experiments, each and everyone within the company can join the project, can see the results. So I think the basic stance is that things are public, and people have to have a really good reason to do stuff more private. So I think that that's one thing that well we strongly believe in, and things we definitely want to encourage within the company. The other part is, of course, working with directors, with domain leads, and trying to steer them to also ask their teams what kind of objectives they have and how they will measure that, and how do we actually define, right? So how do we know that we're on the right track? And of course, experimentation is oftentimes, or almost always, the best approach to make sure that we are on that right track. So that's definitely something we are always encouraging. And it goes with ups and downs, right? So some teams adopt it, some teams are they find it harder because they have other challenges, or they some new people join that team, so you have to almost start over. So therefore, this continuous education program is really important, right? So that we have materials that we can completely continuously onboard people with the way of doing experimentation. So those things are in place, and we keep on supporting that. And
Yeah,
I think about I think your other question was about the challenges. I think one big part is that people are leaving, right? So of course, this is doing experimentation is very process driven, right? Taking the right steps is very process driven. But in the end, it's people, right? We're doing it for customers, and we are people ourselves. So having a good relationship with people, and making sure they understand what they need to do, and that they're doing the right job, is very important. So in case someone leaves, it almost feels you have to start over again. So those challenges will remain, definitely.
Yeah, I guess experimentation, like most business problems, ultimately is like a people problem. And I guess that's a great segue into my next question. As a PM working on experimentation, who are your main stakeholders that you collaborate with on a day-to-day? And then, just maybe going deeper into how do you reduce friction in that experimentation process, while ensuring trust and integrity?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thinking about the stakeholders, well, I mostly work with the product managers themselves. I would almost say that I work with everyone, but that's of course not true. We do have a public Slack channel where each and everyone within the company can drop questions, right? They can ask questions, and the whole team jumps on those questions. But my current focus now is working with the product managers. I'm also actively part of the product management guild. So I really want to understand what product managers are doing, what kind of challenges they are dealing with. And this is not specifically to experimentation, right? I just want to understand what is their world, what are they trying to achieve, and what are the bigger challenges. So I'm heavily involved in that community. And the reason that I've chosen to focus on the PMs, because I think PMs are they have a big role in deciding what the focus is for a team. Of course, they don't take the decisions, but they do lead and have a big role in that. So I think if you understand what PMs are worried about, you have a very good sense of what kind of things you need to solve for. And talking about the points of friction, so what I started doing is well, just listen to people, right? Just ask questions. What is hindering you? What are you experiencing? What is difficult? What should we solve for? I think some people just say, well, we don't need this, right? They say experimentation is not for me. I've tried it. I haven't seen results. So this is probably the most difficult group to persuade. And I think you need other stakeholder management tactics to try to do that. And sometimes for very good reasons, right? So if you don't see other people in your direct sphere doing experimentation, it's easier or to say that, well, this is not for you. So yeah, that's definitely one direction. Of course, it could be that it's not possible, right? Experimentation is not integrated in all the parts yet, or not as well as we would hope for. Some teams are working on on products that don't have a lot of traffic, so A/B testing could be a lot difficult in that space. So that's the category of friction points. Then we have, of course, the experience part, right? People need to be aware of what they need to do. So that's the you could solve that for with education. So that's one other area. And I think the biggest one, that's what my team is focusing on, is sometimes it's just too difficult, right? And that's just identifying from A to Z, what are all the steps you need to take when you're doing an experiment, and then work with static or work with the internal processes to just make tiny changes, but keep optimizing it all the time, removing steps that are unnecessary, and just making it easier to do experiments. So yeah, and the other way that I use this framework a bit, if I talk to PMs, for example, or engineers, and I hear objections against A/B testing, it's easy for me and my team to say, okay, but this is in the category of no need, right? So it helps us to say, okay, we need to solve this in such and such a way. So that's definitely something that I would encourage people to do, to just have a mental model of all the objections that teams or people could have, and then continuously gather that data, right? So you want to know how often this happens, and then based on that, or based on that prioritization, come up with solutions.
Nice. That's super insightful. I think that covers like a lot of common situations that many people in our audience can resonate with. One question that I really like asking our guests is, what's one memorable experiment you've been involved with or heard of in your organization, and what made it so memorable?
I think I will go back. Well, I've been involved in many experiments.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing, right? Because when I talk to people, or my friends or family, and say, "Oh, I help people to run experiments," they often think that I'm the one doing the experiments, but I'm only helping, right? I'm only enabling people.
Yeah.
And that way you do have a good sense of what is happening within the company. And it also gives I think the benefit of being able to take a step back, right? You're more objective, and you have a better, or not better, you have a different view of the experiment itself. Years ago, I was involved in a project where this was a big project, and the solution was already defined. I think looking back, that was completely the wrong direction, right? The solution was defined. There should be an implementation of tabs on a product page. And the reason behind that was that customers needed to have more information, but we wanted to make sure that this was being read as well, right? So legal had a big part in this, and they wanted to make sure that all the requirements of that product were clearly visible. And the solution that people came up with was, okay, we need to put it in tabs. But I knew from other companies and published A/B tests that many times people don't read the tabs, or they don't even see that. I knew and that was within the project, there was qualitative research done where, again, many people didn't even see the different tabs. And when they got pointed towards the tabs, then they would say, oh yeah, this is really handy, right? This is really valuable information. I need to read this. But this was only when those participants were told that this information was there. So I think that was also already a clear direction that wasn't really the best approach. But yeah, the person leading this project was really convinced that this should happen. So luckily, we did a bunch of A/B tests. So we iterated and did within every phase of the project, we tested in production what the impact was. And bottom line, I think 9 out of 10 of those A/B tests had a negative impact on the commercial business, at least. And I think then the really funny part started, right? Because one part of the company was convinced, okay, we shouldn't pursue this because it was clearly hurting the business. But then we got into the discussion, and then clearly there was no alignment at the beginning of what we are trying to solve here, right? And I think experimentation is really, really a strong method and really something you could or should use every time. But you need to be very clear upfront what you're trying to solve for. And if you're okay with losing or hurting the business, then that should be defined in a hypothesis or being discussed upfront. And apparently that came only up at the end of the project when, in the end, this was abandoned because of these reasons. But I think that this would have solved so many hours and so many discussions if we would have the discussion upfront about, okay, what are we trying to solve for here? What are the negative things that could happen? And what are the guardrail metrics that we want to have in place? And yeah, like I said, this was, I think 10, 15 years ago. And the organization wasn't that mature in data-driven decision-making as a whole, and definitely not at experimentation as well. So, but I can clearly remember this experiment.
Yeah, I love this example, and I guess the real takeaway is that, you know, our intuition is wrong more often than we realize, obviously. But also, I think sometimes setting up that hypotheses and like what are those guardrail metrics, like you said, setting those up right at the beginning can really save so many hours of back and forth later. I see Vineet says that A/B testing is very cool, but he's in awe of your AV setup here. I
can also do a demo of my AV setup if you like.
I found it interesting that you said that you, as a PM, you're able to more objectively view A/B testing and experimentation in the organization because you're able to take a step back and see things with more objectively. So I'm curious, how do you measure the success of the experimentation program itself? You know, what do you goal towards each quarter or each year? And what are you tracking on a day-to-day in terms of progress?
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about taking a step back, right? I'm less attached to an idea because I'm not involved in the product in that specific product team. Of course, that is different when it comes to the things that we are developing. So I completely fall in some traps or biases that other PMs will also have with their products. But thinking about measurement, that's one of the first things I did when I joined is thinking about how can we set up internal metrics for the success of experimentation within Vista, because there was a clear North Star roadmap, right? There was a clear direction of, okay, how does experimentation look like at Vista in the next coming years, and how does it feel? How does it taste when you almost do product development at scale? But we didn't really have metrics to track that. So we have, I would say, two categories, right? We have one is focusing on quantity of experiments, doing more, and the other part is quality. And we focused on quantity for a couple of reasons, but I think the main reason is that it's really hard to improve the process around experimentation if you're not doing experiments at all or hardly any experiments. So we really wanted to focus on making it as easy as possible and getting other teams on board and getting them running experiments, and don't really put attention on a good hypothesis or maybe setting up all the metrics that I wanted to see, but just getting them through the flow, through the workflow of setting up an experiment and doing that again and again and again. Because if you go through those motions a couple of times, then you get a better sense of what the cost is, what the effort is of doing an experiment. So you will quickly find out that if there's a new idea, you could say, well, we could test this much sooner. So we focused on quantity. The other part is now, and I think we only transitioned to quality as of last quarter. So we do quarterly goal setting. And last quarter we set up our quality measurement, or the first iteration at least. And this quarter we will continue that. And that is actually looking at how healthy is the experiment. So if there are any errors, we count it as not a qualitative experiment. But also, do people adhere to the hypothesis, right? And is in the hypothesis clearly a description of what we're trying to observe? So those kind of things are more qualitative, but are really important for the quality of an experiment. Yeah, so these are kind of things. And for example, we also track the number of people in our Slack channel, because we see that as a proxy for the adoption, or at least the interest of experimentation. And I think there, if you take a target on, no, we don't see it as a target. We really see it as a signal. I think that's the big difference, and where you could go wrong. Because if I would see it as a target to get the whole company in our Slack channel, I would easily fix that, right? I would just automatically invite everyone, and the Slack channel would automatically grow. But this is only happening based on other people's action. So if they want to join that Slack channel, they can do that. So we really see it as a signal and as a proxy for adoption, and not something that we're really pushing for.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting way to measure it. Like just seeing how many people are involved, trying to get involved by joining the Slack community or Slack channel. I have a couple of questions, I think, which from the audience, which would be, this would be a great time to take those, because it really touches on, some of the things that you just mentioned. One is from Carlos, who asks, so how do you then deal with stakeholders who are more interested in speed rather than trustworthiness? I know you said, doing quantity is a good way to then start refining on the quality of experiments. So I thought this was an interesting question on, like, just balancing, I guess, speed and trustworthiness.
And maybe Carlos here is hinting towards, because doing an experiment, we have to be honest here. It takes time, right? So oftentimes we get into the discussion, yeah, my feature is ready. We've tested this in a qualitative way with users. We are almost sure that this will be an improvement. So we want to ship this to production, and we want to ship this to all the customers as soon as possible. And then if you only then think about doing an A/B test, then indeed it takes time, right? You need to probably need to wait 2 weeks, maybe more, to get that feedback loop in place, and get the data that you're not hurting the business, and hopefully improving on the metrics that you have been set at. So if you look at that, then many teams are optimizing for speed in this case, and speed in this case is probably getting your work in your Jira project from in progress to done, right? Your feature is done, you have delivered something, but I think you're optimizing then for the wrong thing, right? You want to optimize for customer impact or business impact, hopefully both. And that takes time, all right? That takes a little bit more time. But I think it's really important to wait for that impact and almost decouple the production and the development of a feature and the actual validation phase of does it make an impact on customers and the business. So I don't see it as a either or, right? So in the end, if you make this, if experiments are not costing, or of course you need to wait a bit, but setting it up shouldn't take much time, right? There shouldn't be a cost for setting it up. Then in the end, the results from experiments will get you faster to your point of optimization than only shipping features and hoping for the best.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another question on, while we're on the same thread, you talked about the qualitative aspects and measuring, the quality of experiments that you're running at Vista. Vineet asks, do you have a systematic way of measuring, experiment quality? Like, do you give like experiments a numerical score or something like that?
Yeah, so like I touched upon, we only started this last quarter. It's a mix of things that are automated. So we use the information that's coming from Stat6 API. So we've, well, taking a step back. First, we identified what are those points that we think are relevant. Then we identified, okay, which ones are more qualitative, right? A human should do that. And which ones can we just automate? And then we did almost like a hybrid process where half of those points came in automatically and the other half of those points were assessed by the central team. So we went through dozens, I think 250 experiments, labeled them manually, and then compare those scores together as well. So we double checked that we came to the same conclusion. So that way we were able to come up with an average quality score. And now this quarter we want to take that to 100% of the experiments and also increase the quality score itself, right? So what we see, for example, is that not all the time people are logging or stating what the actual results are and tying that back to the hypothesis. And I think that's an important one to, in the future, learn about this experiment. So we think that's really important. So yeah, we're probably gonna come back to Vineet to see if we can improve the static product to make that almost by default. Yeah, so that's a bit of the approach we're taking here.
Yeah, no, that was a very interesting thread, and I'd love to, at some point dive deeper and publish some literature on just measuring the quantity and the quality of experiments and how organizations can, sort of track progress and, goal towards these things. But coming to the tooling that enables scalable experimentation, can you share the thought process behind making that build versus buy decision at Vista? And any advice for those in the audience that are grappling with the same question?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a very relevant question, right? But also a very important one, because it's not a light decision to, especially if you want to build something, your internal product. It costs a lot of resources, although starting is very easy, I would say, right? Getting a feature toggle in place and connecting that to measurement, that's probably very easy, and that's oftentimes in companies very a thing that people think, well, it's easy. We can start this ourselves, and we can do that. But I think getting that from almost version 1 to the next version, that's a lot more difficult, because then you need resources, commitment, you need investment. And to be honest, I fell in that trap, right? Because of my previous company, we did have our own solution, and that had also a lot to do with security and privacy reasons. So there was a clear focus on building stuff ourselves. But then it was really hard to get to the next step. And I think that we started this chat with all those companies that are popping up. So the baseline is now much better, right? If you look at the feature set of products like Static, it's really mature now. So I think it's really difficult to make the business case to start from scratch with your own experimentation platform, unless you have very, very clear use cases that are very important for your company, and you've probably tested that in a POC, and it's probably difficult to get that from a vendor. Maybe that's a reason to build it yourself. But then your question is, okay, why are so many other companies building their own product? Well, if you look at all the mature companies like Booking, Microsoft, they all started 10, 20 years ago, right? And then this availability of mature tooling wasn't there. So then back then it made sense to build it yourselves. Today, I think you should focus much more on getting the best thing out of the market for your company, and then integrate it as much as possible within all the processes and other products within your own organization. And that's definitely our approach as well, right? So my team is more like an integration team. Of course, we do build stuff around the side, but the core is that we are using stuff from Statsig. And for us, that's working really well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's very insightful for people to think about this build versus buy decision. Um, and I also think it was a good, balanced answer. And it can obviously, different companies are in different stages of their journey. But what I want to also, get your thoughts on something maybe more controversial, I guess. And I wanted to ask you, since you see so much in of the things that are happening in this space, what's a hot and controversial, highly discussed topic in experimentation that you actually feel doesn't really matter, meaning it's getting way more attention than it deserves? Is that something you can chat about?
Yeah, definitely. I think for one is that many people believe that you can't do experimentation if the C-suite or the top of the company is not supporting that. And I completely disagree. Although it's easier when it starts from the top, right? It's easier when you have this mandate and you have this commitment and you have someone who have probably seen the power of experimentation at a different company. It's easier if that's in place, but it's definitely not a must. It's not a requirement. And to be honest, I think it's oftentimes also very handy if you can be more flexible and work with the people who already see that value and form like cross-functional teams with people from different departments. Has been at least my approach at ING, my previous company, where I just work with a bunch of people across the organization without having maybe the mandate from the top, but I was able to do a lot with a lot of people together because each and everyone was believing in the power of experimentation. And I think that way, if you find the right people and you get work done in that way of working, it's really powerful because you can move mountains without having to have a dedicated team. Having said that, if you want to take the next step, then you do need to have the mandate. So I think that's one thing, right? So don't wait. My suggestion is don't wait for the mandate, don't wait for the commitment. Just try to find the allies you already have in your organization and try to build what you already have and then show the value. I think that's also a very good part of the flywheel effect, right? If you show value in a very easy or simple way, then you get attention and then this flywheel will spin further. That's one thing. I think the other one is that doing proper research. So many people think, okay, we can't do A/B tests because we haven't have the perfect research set up, right? We don't have the perfect prioritization framework, etc. So people spend a lot of time on that. But my suggestion is always to just don't think too much about this research part. Just test what you already have in the backlog, right? Test what you already are shipping to production. Start A/B testing with that, and then you get a lot of learnings about the process. So that's one benefit. But you'll also find out quickly that it's really difficult to just keep on shipping features if you don't have a clear hypothesis, if you don't have a clear idea of what it's trying to achieve. So that will trigger you to do better research. So I think doing more experiments will, in the end, influence a better process as well.
That's awesome. I love that your hot takes are actually so much more deeper and profound. And it also sounds like you always lean towards like getting things going and getting stuff done rather than waiting for perfection or C-suite buy-in, but like just maybe be a bit scrappy and get things done. But a follow-up to that is, what's a hot topic in experimentation that you actually feel matters? And would you be able to share your stance on that?
Yeah, maybe coming back to the build versus buy discussion. I think it's too much presented as a versus, right? It's build or buy. But I think it's much more a case of, okay, you can buy a solution and then you need to integrate it, right? So there's more like a step in between. It's not you completely buy a solution and that's all you have. No, you can build on top of that and make it work for you. And I think if we present it build versus buy all the time, then we almost skip the part. Oh wait, we can build, we can buy stuff, but then we can build on top of that. And I think that's a very good approach because it also enables you to say, okay, this is a feature that is working for us. You can bring it back to the vendor, and that vendor can say, well, maybe we should scale it up, bring it to the product, and then other companies can also benefit from it. So I think that that's a much smarter approach, but hardly anyone is talking about it.
Nice. I guess we have a couple of questions from our audience that we can take to wrap things up. One is from Abraham, who asks, I would like to understand the best practices around when to do A/B testing and when not to do it in a complex organizational setup. Kind of touched upon some of this, I guess, earlier, but anything you'd like to add to that?
My default answer is always do A/B testing, right?
Yeah.
That's probably the simple one. But I guess there are situations where it's just very difficult. And I think the main point here is that you have to be open to changing your plan, right? So if the whole organization is just to set out, okay, we're just going to do this, even if data is showing us that it's not the best approach, we're still going to continue, then I don't think it's really beneficial to do A/B test. Yeah, you can you can probably save your energy and don't try to persuade people to adopt that. Probably you need to look for another role if that's the stance of the organization, and it happens too often. But yeah, and yeah, maybe the other part is if the organization is very complex in their setup, I think it's probably better to focus on getting that set up in a more structured way, or in a way that there's less dependencies between teams, so that each and every team has a clear focus, a clear goal, because that's also very important. If you want to empower product teams and you want to give them the tools to run experiments, they need to have a clear focus. They need to have a clear goal. And of course, there could be some dependencies with other teams. That will always be the case, but they have to be almost as independent as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We got a question live from one of our attendees, Oriol, who asks, what should be the right approach when results from the experimentation platform do not fully match results from internal data, because it can affect trust in the experimentation platform and damage the culture? Do you have any thoughts on that? Is this something you've seen, in inconsistencies in data and maybe how to handle those situations?
Hi, Oriol. Good to see you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, this happens a lot, and I think the core source is that in many setups it's decoupled, right? So we have an experimentation platform that is having their own data sources, capturing their own data, and then for example, you have your web analytics tool, or you have your data warehouse, and they all have their different definitions. So you have to spend a lot of time in trying to figure out what is happening here. I think one approach is just to accept that there are differences, right? So if there's there's this bandwidth of 10 to 25% of difference, and I think if it's within that bandwidth, I think you just have to accept it. It's just different. Definitions are different. The way of collecting data is different. So yeah, we have differences. I think the solution here, and Statsig is taking that approach with other vendors as well, is to tie your experimentation setup to your data warehouse, right? Because then you're looking at the same single source of truth, and then you don't have this issue anymore, or at least a lot less.
Yeah, that's an approach that we see some customers using. Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. And I guess my final question, and we just can't, do a webinar in this day and age without bringing up AI. And so one of our members from the audience, Xiangwei Zheng, asks, What are the unique challenges for doing A/B testing for AI products? Any perspectives on that, Kevin?
I'm not sure it has unique challenges. Well, of course, developing AI products has unique challenges, but testing that experience, because in the end, we're building a experience for a user, and testing that experience is the same as in other product development parts. So I wouldn't say the experimentation part is different, but I completely understand that building a product with AI capabilities inside of that development product, that development process is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some literature on that on our blogs. If anyone in the audience is interested, like, we have some customers in the AI space, like OpenAI, that use us. So if you'd like to, learn more about that, you can always check out our blogs. But I guess that brings us, we're a couple of minutes over time, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this fireside chat. Huge shout out to Kevin for being here today. We love hearing these stories. I think there was just so much to digest in what you said. Love the examples, your thoughts on culture, measuring experimentation progress, and just being very candid about your experiences. Any final thoughts, Kevin, from your end before we sign off?
Yeah, I would just encourage you to keep doing this, right? I have been watching and hearing a couple of these interviews, and I learn a lot as well. So just a shout out to you. Thanks for inviting me, and just keep on doing it.
So, and what is the best way if anyone wants to reach out to you? Is LinkedIn maybe the best way to connect if people want to, pick your brain further?
LinkedIn is the best way, and if you're on my mailing list and you get a newsletter, just click reply, and that's even easier. I
Yeah.
read email more often than all my LinkedIn messages.
Yeah, definitely encourage our audience to subscribe to Kevin's newsletter, Experimental Mind. It's a weekly recap of like things happening in the space. I think you're at what, week 200? Where are we at right now?
218, I think, next Monday. So yeah, it's going on. I think I started this 10 years ago, so I haven't been consistent for every week by far, but at least the last couple of years I have been doing this, and yeah, I love it, and I will continue it.
Yeah, and no, and we love that passion that you have, Kevin. Like the fact that you take time to do this and really like engage with the community. I think it's really special that you share this passion for the space.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us, and bye for now.